Meet me at the Chazen. I'm your host, Gianofer Fields. As we come to the end of the Emancipation exhibition, it's crystal clear that none of it would have been possible without the interpersonal connections of the members of the Mass Consortium and Studio Sanford Biggers. Inspired by Russian iconography, the oklads, designed by Arjuna Rute Prayer, are embellished by his mother and now familiar voice, Lenore Rute. They are made from many layers of laser-cut wood, painted gold and adorned with jewels, beads, and stones. There are several on display, and at the center of each is a single or multiple portrait of notable Wisconsin African Americans. We were standing in the rolling gallery talking about the work when we were joined by Mark and Alicia Hines.
Being an artist, you're always looking at your work, and it's kind of sometimes can be like a continuing process of creativity. So you're looking at what you've done process-wise, and if I don't want to say what what would I continue doing, but you're just kind of looking at how when you look at anybody's art, I'm looking at it as if it's a piece of work in a museum. I'm not necessarily looking at it this is, look at what I've done. I have that too, but right now I'm seeing it as a piece of work in a museum and liking what I see.
When do you let it hit your heart? When do you let it in? Because you've got your arms folded, you look very studious. You could be in a classroom right now looking at, listening to a lecture.
Yeah.
When are you going to, when, if ever, and maybe you don't have to or there's no answer for this, when does it hit your heart?
Well, my heart's always present with absorbing artwork and stuff. Processing artwork is there's ebbs and flows to it. There's different things happening at different moments, and 10 minutes from now you're going to have a different reaction to seeing artwork. But the heart is always present, and obviously the first impact is you can feel it really intensely, and then you just continue to process it, and I don't know.
It's like that, and for me, looking at this and looking at your face and seeing how everybody's reaction to it, it's like there's all this, again, DNA in the work. There's all this history. This is, in a way, older than you, but all you.
A lot of making this stuff, because it has so much behind it, you kind of have to, because if you're considering all those things, you can freeze up a little bit. So there were moments where I wasn't realizing what I was doing. I was just kind of working and putting these faces, and then towards the end of the project, all of this emotional stuff started coming up when I'm actually placing the faces in the right, respective places, and I'm like, oh wow, this is really powerful. This is what me and Mark have been setting up, and providing the structure and the ideas, and then kind of letting me have free reign for design, which is kind of a new experience, especially working with collaborations, which was fantastic. I really did feel free to do whatever I was feeling, and then kind of later on refining to make it make sense. So I don't know, during the process, parts of your brain and memory and history go away for a minute so you can get the work done and at the same time feel it. Because when you're thinking of all the stuff as you're doing it, can confuse you because there's a lot of emotional things. These are very serious, powerful stories that these folks are experiencing.
Describe them for me, because we've been talking about them sort of in a round, but I want you to get into the meat of them for me, please, and describe them.
Yeah. What do you mean,
Describe them in a physical sense so the audience can have an idea of what we're looking at, but also in the sense of, from the perspective of someone who has so much. Each layer is like a relationship. Each layer is sort of, when I look at these, I see all the layers of the Mass Consortium in Studio Sanford Biggers. I see all these experiences and I see all these layers.
Yeah.
But an audience is like, what the hell is she talking about?
Well, I think it ties back to that thing of like, you can't believe that you were part of it because they kind of exist. They were meant to exist as they are. So, you go to historical museums or you see ancient artwork, and of course you do think about the artist, but you're really thinking about the art, and you're seeing and experiencing the art. So that's how I'm seeing it. And then I go through the layers of like, oh yeah, right. I worked on it, Mark worked on it, my mom, Sanford. It's like, most importantly though, what I'm feeling when I see it, it's layered, no pun intended. It is totally layered. James Cameron, for example, he has such an intense story and a very transcendent way that he handled his story and how he kind of brought light after what happened with him, and transformed and transmuted the energy. And so what we kind of attempted to do is depict that. There's a lot of golden light. These are quite literally painted golden. My mom did her adornment. She was, feeling spiritual energy coming from his mind, and the rays, she was kind of explaining the rays she felt like was representing his, his spiritual light. And his direction from spirit guiding him, and all these, she was really here.
Spiritual light, the rays that are coming from, like most of this kind of religious iconography, the halo, the light that's surrounding one's head felt like it was downloaded information, that he was in a conversation with his higher self, the higher deity. So it felt like instructions. And I felt like I was hearing the direction that he was given, that he was receiving, and he was in a conversation. And normally I'm heavy-handed with embellishing. This I was kind of sparse with because
specific. Not sparse, specific.
Yeah, maybe that's the right word. Thank you. Yeah, it was specific. I was like, I can't put anything here because there's some of the information that he was being given that's not my business. It's no one else's business. So it just doesn't appear. But the pieces that he actually enacted that we can witness are represented by the jadeite and different stones. And then the sparkly ones were maybe how it appeared to other people, like the presentation was attractive. Those were bits of information I felt he was being given. And then the things that are blank spaces are what he was asking or what he was relaying of his experience is none of our business. Only business that we get from this man is what he actually said and what he wrote. I wasn't paying attention to him because I was paying attention to the capes. And Arjuna kept saying, James Cameron's story is incredible and you should really know it. And didn't he wind up, is he Pisces too? We were like,
Wait a minute, wait, okay.
There's a lot of it's layered. That's kind of it's hard to, when you're asking these questions, it's hard to say everything because there's a lot. You could make connections to the Jesus story, quite literally. His story is quite literally, he was the kind of the last surviving person in his friends group, and when intense tragedy happens and you remain open to light, transformative things happen, and he's done that. You hear him talk and you read like what he's said, and he's a vessel, it's really, really intense. And so I think we tried to express the light that's kind of exuding from him, and what you would have to do when you're remaining open through those tragedies. And I don't know if I'm making sense.
We can all make some sense. Alicia, didn't you do you did the writing for this too, yes?
Not for these, but for some of the pieces, I tend to write or edit the cards that accompany the pieces because, as we know, oftentimes vital information about the piece or how it got there or the labor that went into it is lost. And so I kind of have an eye toward that when I'm looking at pieces. And while I didn't write anything specifically for this, whenever we are putting anything out as Mask, it goes through my eye, and just to make sure that we are inclusive, that we're clear. If there's one thing that we can't stand is like jargon, but we realize that like language is powerful and it's subtle. It's a subtle weapon.
I'm just pausing for a second because Alicia says something that's not accurate. When she says that she didn't write anything for this exhibition, what will be a more accurate way to depict it is Janine is the curator and is responsible as the institutional voice for the representations of the objects. Janine, the interplay between Mask and the Chazen was one where we were constantly checking them about descriptions of objects, primarily because that was one of the sources of the problem. When we came to experience Gallery 4, where the Emancipation Group was, there was no proper description for the work itself, nor any of the portraits that were in the gallery. And when we started to investigate, well, what information do you have? What's the provenance for some of these pieces? The provenance and the description that the Chazen provided was, let's say, less than complete. And it wasn't until the Mask team started to really investigate, well, really, who are these people? Who are they? And our round of information really stood as a counter to what the Chazen had for years been representing who these people were and the objects themselves. And Alicia was one of the primary entities producing the counter content for ultimately that when you're reading now the descriptions for these portraits, that is an interplay that's between Mask and Chazen going back and forth and ultimately trying to get it right. And I think we've done a great job in sort of representing sort of how it should be. Alicia has played a particular role in that dynamic.
You know, I go to museums all over the world. I'm one of those people who is weird about that. And I read every card and I think about, oh, this is great the way they set this up, or how do I feel when I walk into this room? That's what I do when I go to museums. So I'm really proud of the work that we've all done here because I feel it is an intervention, not just in an art space, but in a museum space and how we think about how things get presented, why we see things the way we see them, how much of that is no accident and how much of it is, right? How much of it is, synchronistic, how much of it is just anachronistic. Whoa, what happened here? And then here we are. I think, yeah.
So the descriptions for these portraits represent that push and pull. By the time we're working on this work here, that tension really wasn't necessary. I think that the institution had grown on several levels. So there was a competency about the execution here that wove in Janine's leadership, her experience with Mask, and simultaneously Casey Lucchini Butcher's work with Sifting and Reckoning, which is the previous exhibition that was here. Many of the discoveries around who are these black folks that were in and around University of Madison over the course of its development, and what is blackness here, and what is the black experience here. This is information curated by someone else at the university that we were able to integrate and actually empowered some of the design here. And I did want to touch back on the design first because you asked the question.
Yep, let's
we
get
kind of
closer.
started to
I
deep
want to
dive.
interject something real quick. Mark made this beat that's playing in the background. Just saying, this whole process it's a artist collective, and we're always creating, and then we figure out where we're gonna put that art. But Mark did this beat, and this beat is crazy.
Yeah. Every time we hear this beat, Judah says to me, Mark made this beat. And I'm
Mark's like one of the best producers ever.
like no
crazy.
exaggeration, every single time. It's true. He's like,
And you act surprised. Yes.
I'm like, you already told me. He goes, I think it needs to be said again.
He's humble about it, but
Somebody needs
he's nasty with it. Like every time I pull up to the crib, you got the NS10s, and he's just it's crazy, man. Seeing these guys my whole life doing beats, crazy.
This is what happens. You are a product of all this creativity and all this love in an arena where you're allowed to be creative and have love and still be told to go sit down and be quiet when you're acting up. I mean, it's just like there's all this sort of like.
I wouldn't say I've ever gotten sit down and be quiet.
Sit down and think about what you were doing.
It's more like you might want to check what you just said, homie. Like, and then they'll like roast me or something. Like, oh, that's how you're gonna, that's how you're gonna talk. When I was little, you know what I mean?
The question was always when Arjuna was slick talking, like the rest of us, I'd say you need to think about restructuring that sentence. Think about who you're speaking to and what your legacy is with that sentence. And he was like, 3. He's like, 4. I was like, is that how you know who I am? I'm your mom. Look, I gave birth to you. Think about that sentence again. And he would take a couple of minutes, and sometimes he goes, I think I like that sentence. I'm like,
Yes.
but wait a minute.
I gotta change it up. Eventually, yes, it would go sit down.
Oh, yeah,
Shut up. Yeah.
But
there was a
sometimes
process before
There
it,
was a
right?
process, and I'm glad I stuck with the process because eventually he would think about it and he says, "Oh, I don't think I'd want to say that." Okay, so now what would be the sentence? Okay, I didn't appreciate having to eat that thing I didn't want to eat, or I would like it if you would listen to how I feel about that. Perfect. You can disagree with me. You're a human being. Just the tone, man. It's the tone.
And being around all these folks definitely is like, so I grew up around beats, and my uncle, my mom, my pops, everybody's been at the epicenter of hip hop and punk and all this music stuff, and so it's regular. So I'm hearing this beat, I'm like, yeah, Mark cooked this up, like. That's like, and it's like music, it's visuals, it's writing, and so it's constant. So it's really like a cultural thing. It's like, this is what the town's people do. We make art and create stuff and constantly. So I don't know.
Well, that hip hop spirit is
It's in it.
is also what structures and informs this Oklad response. And what I want to do is I want to answer your question about, well, what do we see here? But I want to do it as it relates to all of them, all 4 of them. And then you could deep dive into any of them. I think what I'm giving you is the iconography, the Rosetta Stone, if you will, around how to, nobody, by the way, has really heard. The 3 of us have traded some of this, but I don't think most folks will know these things.
I
So
have
here we
that
go.
talent.
Here we go. Okay. So the Oklads, once again, it's originally a Russian spiritual artwork form, primarily to deify saints, religious figures, and or focus on Jesus Christ and his mother. So many have been made. They're usually a painting covered by a very ornate gold top, which leaves a section open and allows you to see part of the painting behind it. And the covering, the Oklad itself, actually extends the story, usually with the between the carving and the jewelry that's emblazoned on it. So this is something that Sanford, when we came to the Chazen to initially just look at the whole collection for inspiration for the project, Sanford saw some oklads hanging and was like, I love these. How many do you have? And Amy and Kate brought all of them out. We looked at them, we scanned them. So when I say hip hop, scanning, that's sampling for us. It's visual sampling. Yeah. So Sanford's inspiration of those, we sampled them in the first place. That's like digging in the crates, finding that little part of the record, that loop. And we knew we wanted to do something with that, and it sat for a while we were working on the project. But when we knew we needed to tell this story of Blackness moving from ancient Africa and get somewhere here to get folks to resonate with it as a local story, how does this relate to me, though? Then we needed to talk about Black people here. And I think this struggle for appreciating, respecting, and uplifting Black folks is what created the opportunity for Sanford and I using the Oklad itself as a vehicle to say, these are really important Black folks who have made a contribution you probably don't even know about, and we're going to take an opportunity to lift them really to the status that they should already have been respected on. So the Oklad was going to be our vehicle for that. Now, the original plan was to take Oklads that we liked from the Chazen, pop out the pictures of Jesus, whoever else was in there, and go ahead and stick in the people that we wanted to put in there. That was the plan. Simple.
Yeah. I don't see a problem with that.
Right? Straightforward. Yeah. So, look, there are lots of things that Mask has suggested that have made the Chazen's team's eyebrows pop off their skulls. That was one of them. I remember Amy and Kate's face both shocked. I didn't really get what it was at the time, but the things that were articulated back by their team were, well, there's conservation concerns, first of all, which it would relate to exposing these metals and these forms to interact with other unknown things, and well, that puts the actual artifacts themselves at risk. Second being, well, we're concerned about how religious artifacts, when used in this way, might offend people who have a belief that's consistent with what this artifact intends to present. Okay. So I thought, frankly, the second one, while it's considerate, for art's sake, that wasn't the one that wasn't the line I was respecting. It was the conservation line, which we push so many boundaries with the Chazen. If it's around the preservation of the art, that's not really a fair line to push. And I felt like with so many other things that we pushed for and actually won, this wasn't going to be a reasonable thing. We probably wouldn't win that. And I think when you are presented with challenges and constraints, that can create great art. So we accepted the challenge of not being able to use the original Oklad.
It's like not being able to clear a sample.
There it is. So we're like, no problem. We'll make our own.
Replay it ourselves.
Right. Okay, so this is where the design of these comes from. What we know is, okay, these are religious. We're going to lift these folks up. But this is also about Blackness. So how do we have this thing that's sort of this European influence in this artifact and infuse it with Blackness? Well, the first thing was to go to Black spirituality and how we visually represent things in some of our diasporas. So what you'll see you've heard the layer talk so far, but you'll see across each of them that there's sacred geometry, which you see often in Islamic artwork. And here we are layering these forms that sacred geometry is essentially a combination of pure mathematics, how they manifest into shapes in the physical world, and how that represents the actual generative force of the universe. And so we felt by pulling from Black spiritualism, African spiritualism as the fundamental basis of these Oklads, that already starts to set them into a different tonality. So the layers of sacred geometry that you're seeing there are 7 of them in each of these.
And is there a significance to 7?
Yes, of course there is. I'm not going to tell you what that significance is. That's the path that each of us has to go now search and say why 7 and what do these layers represent. But 7 appears in many biblical faith contexts as a significant number, and usually in represents a path. Steps that you have to climb in order to achieve something. So the 7 layers that are that compose each of these oklads represent the spiritual development, at least of the folks that witnessed or had the challenges that they had to overcome. But that 7, you'll have to. There's more than that, and it's embedded.
That's quite literally like when we talk about process that me and Mark were going through. That's an example of things that we would talk about and figure out. Like, okay, how many layers? What are the layers representing? What is this shape? How does it relate to all these things? That's literally the process that we would bounce back and forth and figure out. I thought that was just important. Yeah. Specifically, like
you don't
process-wise.
Struggled with, because the first part of this, there wasn't. You have to remove all of the halos, so that's another piece of iconography we'll talk about, but remove the halos, remove the jewelry, all that, and just look at the patterns that are overlaying each other, because they themselves evoke a level of consciousness if you're paying attention to them, staring into them. And
that was my first
that's part
reaction.
of the algorithm. So when I told you we were going to come up with a workflow, the workflow was like, look, these are the rules that make these things work. They all have to have them, but after we decide what the rules are, I want you to make all the rest on your own. That's the prompt. So 7 layers, one of the things. Use sacred geometry in each of those layers to start to tell the story that supports the character that's going to be the centerpiece of it. And then what you find in the original Oklads often are the presentation of layered halos. The halo obviously distinguish the particular person, if it's a group, or who the focal point is, as having some connectivity to the spiritual world. So 7 layers, got to have a halo, and we also want this additional ethereal layer of adornment, which will invoke yet another part of spiritual consciousness. So those are the functional components that operate in each one of them. But using those constraints, there is an individual story that each one tells and how those elements support that one. So since we started with James Cameron, I'll just talk about that one really quickly because it was the first one that we worked on together. And then the rest were, I think, developed heavily by Arjuna and ultimately Lenore. But this one is the key to all of them. And so you'll see that well, first of all, James Cameron, the story is James Cameron is a survivor of lynching. His 2 friends were lynched and did not survive, and they were hung to death. James Cameron was about to be strung up on the same tree that his teenage friends were murdered on by a mob, and the rope broke, and other people who knew him as a boy in town, other white folks who knew him in town, intervened and in between him and the crowd and essentially dragged him back to jail where he was dragged out of to be hung. So he was on the brink of losing his life at the hands of a lynch mob. And this halo, first of all, represents that noose. This is the noose that he hung from, which actually then becomes the vehicle for his spiritual connectivity.
That's the transformational, like the cross, like Jesus. The cross is where Jesus died, but it's become a Christian symbol for that light. It's bearing the cross. That kind of it's what Mark was saying, but that's what I was trying to say earlier. Yeah.
So with if we, and you see Lenore's additional adornment here is just evoking this idea of a rope. Yeah. But this rope, although it's the means of his death potentially, it's actually the moment where he's having this conversation with God and receiving this information. So to what Lenore said and her own, because I learned about this from Lenore's telling me what she was doing to this. What she was describing before are these dots and dashes that she was getting from the universe and deciding what needs to be placed. But each one of them essentially, think about as spiritual Morse code, dots and dashes. Each one of them being some information, the conversation between James Cameron and God when he's in this state of, am I gonna die at the hands of this lynch mob? And ultimately further, to be saved from it, his position to ultimately forgive this community of that tried to kill him, forgive and create the American Black Holocaust Museum, which tells of his story and many other lynchings. That's how all the layers and pieces that need to fit in the Oklad work to support James Cameron's particular story. So I'm now going to shut up.
Lenore, is it a flow? Is it a transformative state? Are your hands I don't care if it sounds, because it is. Are your hands being moved by something outside of you?
For this one, absolutely. I was like, I don't even understand why I'm having to hear all this. This is unbelievable. I had to stop a few times to pay attention that I was putting my hands in the right place and I wasn't being, putting my personality in it. So I felt very physically engaged, but emotionally completely somewhere else. There was a separation, like, this is work, you can look at it later. Do you understand?
Did you have to protect yourself to a certain extent from it?
Not protecting, minding my business. I've been reading tarot for 30 some odd years. And one of the reasons I was so good at it right out the gate is I didn't understand it. The person who gave me my first deck and said, what do you think of these images? I had no learning about it, so to speak. So it was all intuitive. So I said, I think this, and that. And she said, that was perfect. And she was already reading for 40 years before that. So she said, do you want to learn? I'm like, sure. She goes, don't learn too much, right? Just keep your nose out of it. Keep your heart open. You let the heart speak, right? So you're not using your brain too much. The brain is to help you pick up the card and flip it and to look at the colors, and then the heart is interpreting it. So this was like making a tarot card. It was like a real-time experience. It's like when you see very advanced tarot decks, every color and form within it has some kind of subconscious signaling. You can't understand it like, this is measured that much. No, it's like a little flashlight in your brain, and then your brain sends it to your subconscious, and then you feel something, and that's what this was. I'm like, I was really not present. I was not present, and then after it was done, I look at it the next day. I'm like, oh my goodness. There's a lot of space that needs to be filled. My logical brain is like, I should do more work. Like the first piece I did was Vels, and it was very dense because I didn't know I was doing any other pieces. So the Vel was very like, I'm gonna put the tiniest little beads on the face of the earth in here, one at a time, and just taking my time. And then this one was like, boom. You don't have much time, but you don't need it. This is information. It will sink into people's subconscious, and they'll get the message that his life was. His life was a message through his behavior, through his forgiveness. Who forgives like that, right?
I think she worded, and Mark was wording, what I was, when you first asked me my reaction to these pieces, what they said is kind of reflective of what I'm seeing. It's hard to word when you come across sacred artwork in general, of any culture or time or history. It kind of gives you a sense of silence, and you feel these things, and it's not necessarily easy to word, but when it's effective, it kind of leaves you silent, and that's also connected to the creative process. So like the experiential process and the creative process kind of leaves you in a silent way, and I think that words how that happened, how what they said kind of expresses that.
For me, the hip hop part of it, I just think about, getting the materials and what's in the trunk of my car and who got the glue and gotta go drive and pick up Arjuna and get down there.
chopping samples.
That's the hip hop part of it for me. Like, I think about all the things and the people moving and to get to that, and then to see that transformation, see that process is just really, really incredible. It's like one of the biggest
to
rewards.
make it. I don't usually have this much chain around. And my really good friend Anona, she was in thrift shops, FaceTiming me. She was like, "Is this the right chain?" I mean, she was like,
Right.
Right, like that's
She
the
was
kind of stuff I
so-
see when I see. I'm like, I see your friend, I see
Right.
Andrea, I see like
It's the mystery of creation. You don't know how did this thing
I would
appear?
have never figured it out.
Are
How
you
can I
alone
get the things
responsible
that I
for
need?
it?
She's like, she has in the thrift shop a table full of chains. Which ones do you like? Boom, boom, boom. And then she's discussing. I'll say discussing instead of putting the beats on the lady behind the counter. She says, "You really think this is worth $3?" I'm like, "Oh, no." She's like,
Shouts out Anona.
you could do better than that price wise. We're doing work here, and she needs these chains, and it was like done
She's a
deal.
warrior.
She's
She's-
a warrior, and I would not have been able to do this in any kind of timely manner without her help. And she didn't even know really what I was doing at all. I told her what I was supposed to be doing, and she's like, "I'm on it." I have bags of chain. All I could have done 10 more. She was on it.
We should talk about Val for a second.
Well, I just want to
because-
say one thing
Oh,
though
I'm sorry.
before we leave Mr. Cameron, is that how wonderful for him to be so supported. Like, in saving his life and remembering his life, how wonderful for him to be so supported and to be speaking to so many people on so many different levels. There was a time in his life where this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have been able to all stand together in this institution, have any kind of conversation, and certainly not be this close to anything. I mean, so for us to be able to do this and honor him and be present with him in this moment, I think he's looking directly at us. He's looking for us, and it feels like in his face he's found us. Like he's found us, and there's this. Often when I'm in galleries and I look at things, it becomes. At first, I'm there to see it, but then I sort of experience it, and then I want to see what's happening from the work's perspective, from his perspective, and without sounding like too grandiose, it really does feel like that necklace, like those beads. It's connected, but it's still expanding. Like he's now breathing life into
For sure.
and when they tried to take that breath away from him.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, people are kind of, I don't know how to describe it. He feels present for sure. And I guess that's kind of what we're talking about, spiritual energy emanating, that this maybe could be a conduit to that. It's a little, what do you call it? I don't have the words for it, I'm sorry.
You do. It's just, yeah.
A portal, yes.
Yeah,
She caught it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like energy can either be created or destroyed. So
Yeah, right.
it's just constantly this flow.
Yeah.
And that it could be flowed in a way that's not critical, that's not
Right.
suffocating, minding your business, letting him speak.
Business. Oh my goodness, minding your business is the biggest thing. Minding my opinion is probably more succinct. This is my business. My business is being quiet and listening to what I have to listen to so things come through without my opinion. My opinion is skewed by all the crap that I'm dealing with in my real life and what I've experienced and what I've witnessed to other people. I didn't need to bring that, because then that's not respectful of the energy that's supposed to come through.
You could say it's like the less the short side. What was it? Not being able to see.
Forest for the trees kind of thing.
So like you have a small view that can't really see as far, and it has its little opinions, and then you have a bigger guidance or a bigger part of yourself that is the listening and the creative thing. So yeah, like it sounds like you're just putting that little
That little voice.
to like in its place
Yes.
recognizing where its
Yeah.
place
Yeah,
is.
exactly that. Because it will try to take over. And then you get
That's ego.
Well, I don't want to talk about politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want the little tiny thing that wants to be the king of the universe to be quiet.
Yeah.
So that the larger presence that it truly is, right, can and get a message across that's for more than you and more than the circle of people around you. This is for some people that I'll never meet, right? That's what I bring. This is what I try to bring all the time. It's not try, this is what I'm here for too, right? This amazing gentleman came here to bring his light information to the world to trigger it in other people. I got triggered. That's my making a visual presentation of what I felt the message was.
You've been listening to Meet Me at the Chazen. Our guests are Juna Rute Prayer, Lenore Rute, Alicia Hines, and Mark Hines are members of the Mass Consortium and major contributors to the Remancipation exhibition at UW-Madison's Chazen Museum of Art. Meet Me at the Chazen is a production of the Chazen Museum of Art on the campus of UW-Madison in Madison, Wisconsin. For more information about the museums, its collections, and exhibitions, visit chazen.wisc.edu. I'm your host, Gianofer Fields. Thank you for listening.